darling. Next time, choose a designer who knows fabric.
The ballroom shimmered under a canopy of crystal light as cameras flashed and champagne flowed. Every whisper in the Rosser estate echoed with polished cruelty. Leslie M. Brown stood alone beneath the chandelier, her gown silk ivory with minimalist lines drawing quiet scorn from women wrapped in sequins and envy. Florence C. Bostic, the groom's mother, floated forward in her sea-green gown, pearls trembling against her throat. James E. Rosser, her groom, offered nothing but a grin polished by privilege. Only Todd Scully, his younger brother, stepped closer, his smile sharpened by liquor and arrogance. "Let's test the quality, shall we?" Todd said. Before anyone could move, he hooked a finger into the front of Leslie's dress and yanked. Silk tore like paper. The room gasped. Florence clutched her pearls. James laughed. Cameras clicked. Leslie didn't move. Her eyes, steady, luminous, unflinching, met Todd's. In that stillness, something shifted. No one knew that inside her clutch sat a phone linked to an empire, one that held a $950 million deal the Rosser family worshipped like scripture. That silk gown, minimalist, elegant, $3,000. To the Rosser family, it might as well have been rags. In the middle of their glittering engagement party, every insult landed on the bride like champagne splashing on stone. While the groom laughed instead of defending her, the crowd whispered, "A nobody marrying up. She'll break before the vows." Everyone thought she'd endure it quietly, playing the grateful outsider. But none of them knew that inside her clutch sat a phone connected to the $950 million deal the Rosser family worshipped like scripture. One tap, and their empire would crumble. Leslie M. Brown stood beneath the chandelier in the Rosser estate ballroom, her hands resting lightly at her sides, her ivory gown catching the light in soft, understated waves. The silk was clean-lined, almost severe in its simplicity. No sequins, no drama, no apology. Her dark hair was pulled back with a single pearl clip, and her face, bare except for a touch of color on her lips, looked almost too calm for the room. She wasn't what they expected. Not for James E. Rosser, heir to a real estate and energy empire. Not for this crowd dripping in diamonds and cruelty. The party was everything the Rossers did. Excessive, performative, designed to remind everyone who held power. Marble floors reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers. Gold-trimmed walls framed oil paintings of ancestors who'd built fortunes on ruthless deals. Every guest was someone. A senator's wife, a hedge fund CEO, old money with sharp eyes and sharper tongues. Leslie didn't flinch as their gazes swept over her. She just stood there, holding a glass of champagne she hadn't sipped. Her posture was straight but not rigid, like someone who'd learned to carry herself through storms without bending. Florence C. Bostic, James's mother, glided toward her, sea-green silk billowing around her like a wave. She was 58, with a face kept taut by procedure and a smile that never softened her eyes. She stopped directly in front of Leslie, her voice pitched just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Darling," Florence said, fingering her triple strand of pearls. "Next time, choose a designer who actually knows fabric. This looks budget." Laughter rippled through the crowd. A woman in a crimson gown leaned toward her husband, her whisper intentionally audible. "She looks like she borrowed it from a department store mannequin." Leslie's fingers tightened slightly on her glass, but her face remained serene. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence seemed to irritate Florence more, who turned to a cluster of women nearby and said, "Imagine my son with someone so plain." A woman in black approached, diamonds glittering at her throat. She was one of Florence's oldest friends, known for eviscerating newcomers at charity galas. "Oh, sweetheart," she cooed, her voice sticky with false sympathy. "You must tell us where you shop. I could use a good laugh." The group around her tittered, eyes bright with anticipation. Leslie set her glass down on a passing waiter's tray, the movement slow and deliberate. She looked at the woman, her voice quiet but sharp as a scalpel hidden in silk. "I shop where people don't confuse price tags with worth." The woman's smile froze. A few guests shifted, but the moment dissolved as someone else called out, "She's got nerve. Won't last long, but she's got nerve." The laughter resumed, but Leslie's eyes held something the crowd missed, a steady, luminous certainty. James E. Rosser stood 10 feet away, adjusting his Rolex, his handsome face arranged in a practiced smile. He was 31, tall, with the kind of charm that made people overlook his weakness. But he didn't step forward, didn't say a word to defend her. His eyes flicked to Leslie, then away, like he was embarrassed to be associated with her. The crowd noticed. A woman with diamond earrings and a surgically perfect face leaned in, her voice carrying, "She's clearly after his money. Why else would he pick her?" Another guest, a balding man with a Patek Philippe watch, chuckled. "James is slumming it." Mother must be furious. Leslie's lips parted as if she might speak, but she closed them again. Her hand brushed the edge of her small clutch, the one holding her phone, the one connected to everything these people took for granted. "Look, before we go further, if this moment landed, if you've ever felt that sting of being underestimated, take a second. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, let me know you're here. These stories matter because we've all been the outsider in someone's glittering room. All right, let's keep going." The insults didn't stop. Todd Scully, James's younger brother, swaggered over. His tie loosened, his grin sharpened by 3 whiskeys and inherited arrogance. He was 28, with their father's eyes and none of his restraint. "Isabella, wait, Leslie, sorry," he slurred, loud enough to draw every eye. "If you really loved my brother, you'd have brought something to the table, a dowry, a name. Oh, wait," he laughed. "You don't have either." The crowd erupted. Leslie's eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, the room seemed to hold its breath. She tilted her head slightly, her voice soft but crystalline. "You seem very confident about that." Todd blinked, thrown, but recovered with a smirk. "Honey, I know desperation when I see it." The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp, and the guests devoured them, their whispers growing bolder. A young man, one of James's college friends, barely 30, with slicked-back hair and an Hermes belt, decided to join in. "Hey, Leslie, do you even know which fork to use for oysters?" He held up a cocktail fork like a trophy. The room roared. He grinned, basking in the attention. Leslie turned slowly. She picked up a fork from the nearest table, examined it once, and set it down with a soft clink. "I know enough to eat without performing for strangers," she said, her voice so calm it seemed to drain the air from his lungs. The laughter stuttered. He looked away, cheeks flushed, but someone else quickly filled the void. Across the room, a woman in a beaded dress with too much perfume stage whispered to her friend, "Look at her shoes, modest heels. She doesn't belong here." Another voice, a man with a loud laugh and louder opinions, chimed in, "Florence will have her out before the wedding. Mark my words." Leslie's hand rested on her clutch, her fingers pausing there like she was anchoring herself. She didn't look at James, who was now laughing with a group of men, his back to her. The air felt colder, the judgment thicker. Florence circled back, her voice dripping with manufactured pity. "Dear, you must feel so out of place. Why don't you sit in the corner? Less conspicuous." Leslie's gaze lifted, steady and unyielding. "I'm fine where I am." The room paused, just for a second, before the laughter started again. An older man, a retired investment banker with a paunch and a condescending smirk, leaned against a marble pillar, swirling his scotch. "You know, girl, you're brave to stand there, but bravery doesn't buy you a seat at this table," he said, loud enough to command attention. "You're out of your league." Leslie's fingers stilled on her clutch. She turned to face him, her movement unhurried, almost theatrical. She stepped closer, just enough to make him shift his weight. "Funny," she said, her voice soft but cutting. "I always thought leagues were for people too afraid to play the real game." The banker's smirk faltered. A few guests exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh or retreat into silence. Florence's eyes narrowed, sensing a shift she couldn't control. The party dragged on, each minute heavier than the last. The insults had become a sport now, with guests competing to land the sharpest blow. A young woman, maybe a distant Rosser cousin, with glossy lips and a vicious smile, stepped close. "You know, Leslie, you're brave to show up looking like that. Most girls would have at least tried." Her friend snickered. Leslie's fingers twitched toward her clutch, but she stopped herself. She looked at the woman, her eyes calm but piercing. "Tried what, exactly?" The question landed like a stone. The woman faltered, her smile slipping. Before she could recover, another voice called out from across the room. "Maybe she's saving money for the honeymoon." A man in a navy suit laughed at his own joke, and others joined in. Leslie's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She simply turned away, her gaze drifting toward the tall windows overlooking the estate gardens. For a moment, she looked almost peaceful, like she was somewhere else entirely. That's when Todd made his move. He'd been circling her all night like a shark sensing blood, and now, emboldened by alcohol and the crowd's encouragement, he stepped directly in front of her. His eyes were glassy, his grin sharp and ugly. "You know what?" Todd said, his voice loud enough to silence nearby conversations. "I think we should test the quality of this dress, see if it's as cheap as it looks." The room went still. Even Florence looked uncertain, her glass halfway to her lips. "Todd," James said from across the room, but his voice was weak, more suggestion than command. Todd ignored him. He reached out, hooking a finger into the delicate neckline of Leslie's gown. "Let's see what we're really working with here," he said. And then he yanked. The sound of tearing silk cut through the ballroom like a whip crack. The fabric ripped cleanly down the front, exposing the simple slip beneath. Pearls from the trim scattered across the marble floor, each one bouncing with a tiny, awful click. The room gasped, a collective inhale of shock and delight. Florence's hand flew to her throat, clutching her pearls, but her eyes gleamed with something that looked almost like satisfaction. James laughed, a short, nervous bark that he tried to cover with a cough, but it was too late. Everyone heard it. Cameras flashed, phones came out. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, did you see that?" Leslie stood perfectly still. Her gown hung open, ruined, the ivory silk gaping like a wound. But her face remained absolutely calm. She didn't cover herself, didn't cry, didn't run. She simply looked at Todd, her eyes so steady and luminous that for a moment his grin faltered. "Feel better?" she asked quietly. Todd laughed again, louder this time, trying to reclaim his confidence. "Much better. Now we know what we're dealing with." The crowd erupted in nervous laughter, whispers spreading like wildfire. Florence moved to Todd's side, patting his arm as if he'd done something clever. James looked away, adjusting his cufflinks again, his face carefully blank. Leslie's hand moved to her clutch. She opened it slowly, her fingers brushing against her phone, the screen glowing with a single notification. Across the room, 3 men watched in silence. They wore tailored suits that didn't scream wealth but whispered it. Their faces were carefully neutral, but their eyes tracked every movement. Jason Zarate, tall and lean with silver-streaked hair, exchanged a glance with Adam Grill, who stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Beside them, Mr. Carmouche checked his watch, then looked back at Leslie. They weren't socialites. They weren't family friends. They were strategists, board members of LMB Innovations, a tech energy conglomerate that had been quietly negotiating with Rosser Holdings for months. The $950 million deal everyone in this room bragged about? The one that would save Rosser Holdings from the financial cliff they'd been teetering on for 2 years? It belonged to Leslie. But no one here knew that. Not Florence, who was now laughing with her friends about poor taste in seamstresses. Not Todd, who was accepting congratulations like he'd won a prize. Not James, who was pretending this had never happened. No one knew that the woman they'd just humiliated held their entire future in her hands. Leslie closed her clutch with a soft snap. She looked around the room one last time, at the chandelier that had witnessed her humiliation, at the marble floors littered with pearls, at the faces twisted with laughter and contempt. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her torn gown trailing behind her like a battle flag. Florence's voice rang out as Leslie reached the door.
to my son's future, and to a bride who will learn our family's standards." The crowd roared with applause. Glasses clinked. The party resumed as if nothing had happened. Leslie paused at the threshold, her hand on the doorframe. Her phone buzzed once in her clutch. An encrypted message from Jason. "Ready when you are." She typed back with steady fingers. "Almost." Then she disappeared into the night, leaving behind a room full of people who had no idea what was coming. Behind her, the Rosser Empire glittered, oblivious, arrogant, and completely unaware that its foundation had just begun to crack.
The night air outside the Rosser estate carried the chill of early spring, but Leslie barely felt it. The laughter still echoed behind her, muffled by glass and distance, like ghosts clinking champagne. She walked toward the circular drive, the torn silk of her gown whispering around her legs. Cameras flashed again from the gate. Someone shouted her name. She didn't look back. Her driver opened the door of the waiting car, eyes darting to the ruined dress, then quickly away. She slid into the back seat, exhaling the first breath she'd allowed herself in hours. The door shut. The music from the ballroom vanished, replaced by the low hum of the engine and her own pulse. On the seat beside her, her clutch vibrated once another message from Jason Zarate. "Jay-Z. Press already calling. Want us to stall?" Leslie typed one word. "No." She stared at the phone's glow, watching her reflection blur in the window. Her hands were steady, but the tremor started deeper, the kind that comes after adrenaline, not fear. In the glass, the seam of the torn gown looked like a scar drawn across ivory. For a fleeting moment, humiliation burned hot. The flash of cameras, the laughter, James's laugh that one still cut. But the heat cooled quickly, leaving a precision she could trust. Anger, when contained, was a scalpel. She turned her head slightly, catching the estate's reflection shrinking in the distance. Inside, she imagined Florence already spinning the story, transforming cruelty into tradition. "She'll learn our ways," Florence would be saying, voice sugary, smug. The guests would nod, pretending to disapprove while savoring the drama. Leslie's phone buzzed again, this time, Adam Grill. "Adam. Board wants to know if the announcement proceeds as planned." She tapped back. "We wait until the ceremony. I want them relaxed." The car slowed at the gate. Through the tinted window she caught sight of Todd on the terrace, glass in hand, grinning at a cluster of guests. James stood nearby, avoiding his mother's gaze, pretending to listen to a senator's story. Cowardice looked good in tuxedo lighting. "Ma'am?" The driver's voice was careful. "Back to the city?" Leslie blinked once, pulled herself out of the image. "Yes? And take the long way." The car rolled forward, headlights slicing through the mist. She loosened the pearl clip from her hair, letting it fall into her lap. A tiny crack ran through its surface, another small casualty. In the quiet, she opened a new note on her phone, typing slowly. Lesson 1. They mistake silence for surrender. She stared at the words for a moment, then deleted them. She didn't need a reminder. Back inside the ballroom, Florence's voice carried easily above the music. "Poor thing must be sensitive," she said to no one in particular, adjusting her pearls. "It's always the simple girls who can't handle the spotlight." Laughter rippled, tentative at first, then eager. Guests needed direction on how to behave. Florence provided it. "She'll calm down," she continued, waving a manicured hand. "These outsiders always do." James lingered near the bar, jaw tight. He'd laughed earlier, he couldn't even remember why. Maybe because Todd's bravado had seemed harmless, because the room expected it. But now, as the whispers multiplied, he felt the edges closing in. A friend clapped him on the back. "Bit of a scene, huh? Hope your fiancé's not a drama type." James forced a grin. "She'll be fine." Florence turned toward him. "Of course she will. By tomorrow no one will remember this. But people would. They always remembered a scandal that involved torn silk and a quiet woman who didn't fight back." At the far end of the ballroom, near the mirrored wall, Jason Zarate, Adam Grill, and Mr. Carmouche watched the performance with the detachment of men who'd seen better boardrooms. Jason sipped his drink without tasting it. "They have no idea," he murmured. Adam's jaw tightened. "If she calls it tonight, Rosser stock collapses before morning." "Not yet," Jason said. "She won't move in anger. That's not her style." Carmouche adjusted his cufflinks. "She'll move when it matters. And when she does, they won't see it coming." Their conversation ended as Florence's voice rose again, claiming the microphone from the band leader. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, glowing with control, "before we continue our celebration, I have wonderful news." The chatter stilled. James looked up, startled. Florence smiled, basking in her own spotlight. Rosser Holdings is pleased to announce its upcoming merger with LMB Innovations, a partnership worth nearly $1 billion, the future of both families secured. Applause burst across the room. Guests turned to congratulate the Rossers. Todd raised his glass and shouted, "To keeping it in the family." Jason's expression didn't change, but his eyes flicked toward Adam. "So she's going public early," he thought. Perfect. On a balcony above the crowd, a reporter from a business magazine typed the announcement into her phone. Within minutes, social feeds began lighting up. Rosser Holdings announces billion-dollar merger with LMB Innovations. Rosser Heir. To wed business partner's daughter, the alliance of the decade. Florence bowed slightly, handing the microphone back to the band. Her triumph complete. Downstairs, Jason checked his watch. "She'll see this before she even gets home." Adam nodded. Then it starts. In the car, Leslie's phone lit up with notifications, press alerts, market tags, Florence's quotes already circulating. She scrolled through them, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. Florence C. Bostic, self-appointed queen of the Rossers, had just tied her family's reputation to a deal she didn't control. Leslie leaned her head back against the seat, eyes half closed. The hum of the city was getting louder. Her phone buzzed again, a new message from Jason. She made the announcement. "Public. Everyone's watching now." Leslie typed back, fingers steady. "Good, let them look. The next show's at the wedding." She closed the phone and watched the city lights flicker against the window, every reflection sharper than before. The laughter from the ballroom still echoed somewhere behind her, but it no longer hurt. It was just noise background to the silence of someone preparing a storm. By morning, the story had legs. It wasn't front-page scandal yet, but it was spreading a ripple of curiosity disguised as etiquette gossip. The Rosser engagement party, guests whispered, had taken a turn. No one mentioned the dress directly, just phrases like unfortunate incident or a little excitement at the end of the night. But every retelling leaned closer to cruelty, each version more polished than the last. By noon, Florence was already spinning damage control. She sat at the breakfast table in her silk robe, coffee untouched, pearls back around her neck as if to remind herself of their permanence. "She's fragile," she told a friend on speakerphone. "It's nerves. Poor thing's not used to this world yet." From the far end of the table, James stared at his tablet. The morning markets looked promising. Rosser Holdings stock had ticked up slightly after the merger announcement. Florence called it momentum. James called it luck. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Leslie standing in that torn gown still, unflinching, too composed for someone supposedly humiliated. "She'll come around," Florence said, waving a hand when he didn't respond. "Apologize, get some rest, and make sure she doesn't talk to the press. You know how women dramatize these things." James said nothing. He thought of calling Leslie, but what would he say? "Sorry my brother ripped your dress while I laughed?" He rubbed a hand over his jaw and went back to pretending to read the news. Across the city, Leslie sat at a small corner table in the cafe beneath her office building. Her new assistant, Mia, hovered nearby with a laptop open and 3 phones blinking with notifications. "Everything's running on schedule," Mia said, glancing at the tablet in front of her. "The press release you approved is queued for wedding day. We can delay if you want." Leslie stirred her tea once, watching the swirl settle. "No," she said softly, "timing stays." Mia hesitated. "You saw the news?" Leslie nodded. Florence made her announcement. She just bought herself the front row seat. The younger woman smiled faintly. "You think she knows?" "She thinks I'm decoration." Leslie's tone held no bitterness, just clarity. "That's her mistake." A man in a tailored navy suit approached the table. Jason Zarate, precise, even off duty. "The board's satisfied," he said quietly. "We've reviewed the clauses. If they breach conduct, the contract is void on your authority alone." Leslie met his gaze. "They already have." Jason's mouth curved into something almost like admiration. "You're not striking yet." "Not yet." She finished her tea, the porcelain clinking softly. "They need to feel safe first. Complacent people never look up until the floor gives way." Adam Grill arrived moments later, carrying a folder of documents. Florence called the media again. "She's arranging a charity event for next week. Wants photos of the happy couple." Leslie's eyes flicked toward him, expression unreadable. "Let her. I'll attend." Mia blinked. "After what happened?" Leslie's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "If you leave a battlefield too early, they think they've won." Jason exchanged a look with Adam. "She's turning their spotlight into her weapon," he murmured. Leslie glanced out the window where the city pulsed with morning rhythm, cars, horns, glass, and speed. "No," she said, "I'm just waiting for the right lighting." At the Rosser offices uptown, Todd nursed his hangover and his ego in equal measure. "She'll get over it," he muttered to no one in particular, though his assistant pretended to agree. The clip from the party, someone's shaky phone recording of the rip, had begun circulating in private investor chat groups. Florence hadn't seen it yet. James had. He'd watched it twice that morning, alone in his office, the volume low. The camera caught everything. Todd's smirk, Florence's frozen approval, the moment Leslie stood motionless as silk tore from her shoulders, the steadiness of her eyes when she said, "Feel better?" He'd expected anger or tears, something human. Instead, there was composure so precise it unsettled him. A soft knock at his door. His secretary leaned in. "Your mother's calling, sir." He turned back to his desk. "Tell her I'm in a meeting." Late that evening, Leslie returned to her apartment overlooking the lake. The gown was gone, folded into a plain box, now resting in her closet. She didn't look at it. Instead, she poured a glass of water and walked to the window. The city lights reflected on the surface of the water like broken glass, beautiful, jagged, shifting. Below, she could hear faint music drifting up from a wedding rehearsal in the park pavilion. Someone else's story. Someone else's beginning. Her phone buzzed once on the counter. A text from Jason. "Florence confirmed the joint press conference for next week. Wants you seated beside James." Leslie typed back. "Perfect." She set the phone down, the corner of her mouth tightening just enough to suggest thought, not satisfaction. The humiliation from the night before was fading, not erased, but repurposed. A lesson refiled under strategy. Outside, a low roll of thunder echoed over the lake. She closed the curtains slowly, her reflection vanishing into the dark. Tomorrow, the whispers would grow louder. Let them. They were only sound, and sound, like power, was easy to redirect when you knew where the echoes would fall. The thunder over the lake rolled again, low and deliberate, like a drumbeat she'd been waiting for. Leslie stood in her darkened apartment, one hand resting on the glass. The city glowed beneath her, a constellation of ambition and deceit. Somewhere inside that maze of light was a building that still bore her father's name, even if few people remembered it anymore. Brown Technologies. She closed her eyes, and the skyline blurred into memory. The last time she'd seen her father, the machines had already started to hum. Oxygen hissed quietly in the corner of the hospital room. The man who'd once built entire networks from scratch now struggled to hold a pen. Leslie sat beside him, her hand covering his, steadying the tremor. "Don't sell your name," he'd whispered, eyes fixed on hers. "They'll offer you everything: position, shares, respect. Keep the name. It's the only thing they can't buy." She nodded, swallowing the ache in her throat. "I won't." He smiled faintly. "Then you'll be fine." That night, he was gone. In the years that followed, Leslie kept her promise, though not in the way the world expected. She'd inherited a company bleeding from within Brown Technologies, once a modest but respected software firm. The board had wanted to sell, calling her too young, too inexperienced, too female to stabilize it. So she did what they couldn't see. She rebranded it quietly, stripped the name from its signage, and folded its assets into a new venture, a simple three-letter monogram that hid its origin: LMB Innovations. Under those initials, she rebuilt everything. The first deal came small, an energy grid optimization project in Austin, then a logistics AI platform for medical supply chains. By the time her competitors realized who was behind the company, she'd already outpaced them. No press releases, no photographs, no interviews, only results. Power built in silence. And when journalists started calling, she declined every request. They wrote about the ghost CEO who turned failing companies into industry leaders, who never appeared at conferences but always delivered double-digit growth. They speculated: a man, a group, a private fund. No one guessed Leslie M. Brown. It was exactly how she wanted it. Now, standing by the window with the thunder fading, she thought of her father again. She'd built everything he'd imagined, a network of innovation without cruelty, of influence without greed. And yet, here she was, preparing to tear down a family whose empire had thrived on both. She turned from the window, walked to her desk, and opened her laptop. A map of subsidiaries and investment streams glowed across the screen, the veins of the Rosser LMB deal. A single command could reroute them, but not yet. Timing mattered. A soft chime announced a new message from Adam Grill. Florence scheduled the rehearsal dinner at the estate. Todd's name is on the guest list. You'll want to prepare. Leslie read it twice, her face expressionless. She could almost hear Florence's laughter, see Todd's smug grin. They would try again, another public spectacle disguised as celebration. Florence believed humiliation was a form of control. But Leslie understood something Florence never would. Control only worked when the other person didn't know they had power. She typed a reply: "Let them have their stage. I'll bring the script." At the same hour, across town, Florence sat in the Rosser dining room, surrounded by her chosen circle. The table gleamed with silver and arrogance. "We'll keep it small," she said, sipping her wine. "Family and investors only, a chance to remind her of her place before the wedding. Presentation is everything." Todd grinned, still basking in the fading glow of last night's cruelty. "You sure she'll even show up?" "She will," Florence said confidently. "Girls like her always do. They need to prove they belong." Todd leaned back, smirking. "Then I'll make sure she remembers where she doesn't." James said nothing. He stared down at his plate, pushing his food around like it might answer for him. Florence's gaze sharpened. "And you, James? You'll be charming this time, yes?" He forced a smile. "Always." Florence nodded approvingly. "Good. Appearances matter more than feelings. We'll show everyone that the Rossers still hold class." From her end of the table, a servant refilled her glass. She didn't notice the thin crack running through its stem. Back in her office, Leslie sat beneath the soft hum of city traffic, surrounded by whiteboards scribbled with equations, projections, timelines. Her team worked elsewhere tonight, Jason coordinating the financial transfer, Adam reviewing contracts, Carmouche aligning the energy sector negotiations. Here, alone, she preferred silence, the kind that let thoughts sharpen into precision. She studied the merger contract again, eyes moving to the clause labeled mutual conduct. One line stood out: "Any public action detrimental to either party's reputation constitutes grounds for dissolution." Her thumb brushed the words lightly. The clause was hers, her insertion, her safeguard. They'd signed it without question, too arrogant to read the fine print. And now Florence's announcement had gone public, premature, unauthorized, and riddled with misrepresentations. That alone was enough to break the deal. Leslie leaned back, watching the cursor blink. Her reflection stared back from the dark screen, calm, deliberate, and patient. In less than 48 hours, she would walk back into that mansion, same walls, same people, same chandelier, and watch them try again to belittle her. But this time, she wouldn't be the silent bride. She reached over, turned off the lamp, and let the city lights spill across her desk. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "the mask starts to slip." Morning arrived with the same precision Leslie demanded of everything she built. Sunlight spilled through the high glass panes of her office, catching the chrome edges of her desk. She had already been there for hours, coffee half finished, files open, a quiet symphony of control. Her assistant Mia stepped in softly. "Florence Rosser confirmed your attendance at the dinner tonight. She requested you wear something appropriate for family photographs." Leslie didn't look up. "Tell her I'll meet her expectations." Mia hesitated, sensing a double meaning she didn't dare interpret. "Would you like security arranged?" Leslie finally glanced up, her expression unreadable. "No, just the driver." She signed the last document, slid it into a folder, and closed her laptop. "They think they're planning a performance," she murmured. "Let's make sure it's worth watching." At the Rosser estate, the house was already humming. Staff moved like clockwork under Florence's supervision, polishing silver, arranging lilies, adjusting seating cards that placed Leslie at the far end of the long mahogany table. Todd had taken charge of the wine, naturally pouring himself more than anyone else. Florence's mood glowed with confidence. The scandal from the party had almost vanished, replaced by the promise of tonight's family reconciliation. She'd even told the society columnists that the bride was eager to learn and deeply committed to tradition. Control restored, image repaired. She looked at herself in the mirror one last time, smoothing the emerald satin at her waist. "Perfection is an act of endurance," she whispered to her reflection, "and I've perfected both." Downstairs, Todd was already drinking. "You sure about inviting her back here, Mother? She might faint again if someone sneezes too hard." Florence's voice cut sharp. "You embarrassed this family enough already. Try to behave like a Rosser tonight." Todd grinned, unbothered. "Depends on the entertainment." James entered then, his tie slightly asked, eyes shadowed from another sleepless night. "If this is about cleaning up your mess," he said to Todd, "try not to make a new one." Todd lifted his glass. "No promises." Florence stepped between them. "Enough. We'll dine, we'll smile, and we'll remind everyone what refinement looks like. She'll sit, she'll smile, and she'll know her place." James didn't answer. Somewhere deep down, a small voice whispered that Leslie was never the one who needed reminding. By evening, the estate glowed again, chandeliers polished, strings of light stretched over the terrace. The dinner was smaller than the engagement party, but the tension thicker. Investors, family friends, and a few carefully chosen journalists filled the space with polite laughter. The air shifted the moment Leslie arrived. She stepped out of the car in a charcoal silk gown that caught the light without begging for it, elegance without extravagance. Her hair swept back, her expression calm, poised. Even Florence hesitated before recovering her smile. "Leslie, darling," she said, offering both hands. "You look improved." Leslie met her eyes. "Practice makes perfect." A murmur rippled through the nearby guests, a polite chuckle, uncertain which side to take. Florence's smile didn't falter, but her grip tightened. "Come in, dear, we're just about to begin." Inside, the dining hall glittered with quiet wealth candles, gold-rimmed china, crystal glasses aligned with military precision. Leslie took her seat at the end of the table. From there, she could see everything: Todd's smirk, Florence's orchestrated charm, James's restless silence. Dinner began. Conversation drifted toward markets, politics, philanthropy, safe subjects for people who needed distraction. Every so often, Florence steered the topic toward Leslie. Each compliment sharpened just enough to draw blood. "I hear you've been keeping busy," Florence said sweetly. "So refreshing to see a woman take an interest in business, even if it's just for a hobby." Todd laughed, raising his glass. "Hope she's not too busy to plan a wedding." Leslie's fork touched her plate with the faintest click. "I make time for what matters." Florence tilted her head, smile steady. "Of course, but once you're married, you'll find priorities change." Across the table, one of the investors leaned forward, eager to please Florence. "Mrs. Rosser's right. The merger will make life easier for you. Fewer worries, more family time." Leslie dabbed her napkin against her lips, her tone polite but cool. "I've found fewer worries usually mean fewer decisions worth making." Jason Zarati, seated 2 places down, nearly smiled into his glass. Florence's eye twitched, just once. The conversation shifted, but the tension lingered, quiet and deliberate. Todd grew louder with each refill of wine, interrupting his mother, cracking jokes about family values. At one point, he turned to Leslie, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Relax, sis," he slurred. "You're marrying into royalty here. Try to look grateful." Leslie met his gaze. Royalty without loyalty doesn't last long. The table went still. Forks paused. Even Florence's laughter sounded forced. James cleared his throat. "That's enough." Todd shrugged. "Just a joke." Florence recovered her poise. "Boys will be boys," she said lightly, waving a hand. "Now let's toast to the future." Crystal clinked. Cameras flashed. Another perfect illusion. From her seat, Leslie glanced down at her phone resting quietly beside her plate. A single message from Adam appeared on screen. "Acquisition documents finalized. Your sign-off needed by midnight." She typed back beneath the table, "Understood." Then, setting the phone face down, she raised her glass and smiled at Florence, not the shy smile of a bride, but something colder, deliberate. "To family," she said, her voice low but clear. "May it always earn what it thinks it deserves." The room went silent for half a breath before the applause resumed, too loud, too late. Florence forced another smile, her knuckles whitening around the stem of her glass. Todd looked confused, James wary. But Leslie didn't notice them anymore. She was already planning tomorrow, the shift, the reveal, the quiet undoing that would start with a single calculated decision. Outside, thunder rolled again over the horizon, so distant it almost sounded like applause. The rehearsal dinner glowed like a stage. Chandeliers burned high above a table set for 30, each place marked by gold-edged cards and fragile crystal stemware. Every surface reflected light, every conversation hummed with polite venom. Florence C. Bostic moved through the room like a conductor, ensuring every note of civility played in her favor. "Smile for the photographers," she whispered to a passing cousin. "No one should think this family lacks unity." At the head of the table sat James E. Rosser, his tuxedo immaculate, his smile practiced. The laughter around him was effortless, rehearsed a man basking in admiration he hadn't earned. Leslie arrived 10 minutes late, deliberately, enough to stir unease. The moment she stepped into the dining hall, conversation softened, heads turned, the soft click of her heels against marble echoed with quiet confidence. She wore a pale silver gown this time, not extravagant, but the fabric shimmered faintly when she moved, like light bending around control. Her pearls were small and real, the kind of luxury subtle enough to go unnoticed by people who didn't understand authenticity. Todd, already half drunk, grinned broadly. "Look who decided to join the royals." Florence turned, her expression sugar-sweet. "Leslie, darling, we were beginning to worry you'd gotten lost. I imagine our estate is quite overwhelming for someone from, where was it again?" Leslie's smile never faltered. "Chicago." "Ah, yes," Florence purred. "So industrious, how charming." A few guests tittered, catching the cue. Leslie took her seat beside James, who leaned slightly away, adjusting his cufflinks. He smelled faintly of expensive cologne and guilt. Across the table, one of Florence's friends whispered loudly, "She's pretty, I'll give her that. Plain, but earnest." Florence gave a polite laugh. "We all start somewhere." The first course arrived, lobster bisque served in porcelain bowls worth more than some people's rent. As the servers moved around them, the conversation drifted toward legacy and acquisitions. "So," said Harold Denton, one of the Rosser board members, "I hear the Rosser-LMB merger is nearly finalized. James, your father would be proud. $950 million, quite the number." James smiled modestly, glancing toward Florence. "We're in good hands." "LMB Innovations," Harold continued. "Interesting company. Private leadership, very discreet. I hear the CEO's initials are the only thing the public knows." Florence waved a hand. "A formality. Small firm, big contract. We're elevating them more than they elevate us." Leslie's spoon touched the edge of her bowl with a soft ring. "Elevation depends on perspective," she said, her tone smooth, unhurried. Todd leaned forward, grinning. Meaning? Some people build empires, she said. Others inherit them and call it destiny. For a brief second, the table fell silent. Forks paused midair. Then someone laughed nervously, mistaking her calm for charm. Florence's smile thinned. My dear, ambition can be so unbecoming in a woman, especially one about to marry into a family of tradition. Leslie turned her head, meeting Florence's gaze. I'm sure it's difficult to imagine ambition when tradition's been doing all the work for you. Todd choked on his wine. A few guests pretended to cough to cover their laughter. James' jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Florence took a slow sip of champagne, then placed her glass down carefully, like she was resetting the tempo. Tell us about your family, Leslie. We've heard so little. Most of them prefer privacy, Leslie said, though my father used to say you can tell a lot about people by what they mock. Todd snorted. Guess he'd have a lot to say tonight. Leslie looked at him, not angry, just assessing. He would, mostly about you. The table broke into uneasy chuckles. Even Florence's veneer flickered. Jason Zarate, seated 3 seats down, hid his smirk behind a napkin. He'd seen this version of Leslie before, the one who dismantled billion-dollar negotiations without ever raising her voice. Dessert arrived early, a subtle signal from Florence to hurry things along. The power was slipping, and she could feel it. She needed to reassert control before the night ended. Tell me, Leslie, Florence said sweetly, do you ever feel intimidated by all this? She gestured at the gleaming table, the expensive laughter. A smaller background must make these settings rather daunting. Leslie's tone remained polite, almost tender, only when I'm surrounded by people mistaking comfort for superiority. The air froze. Florence's lips curved into something sharp. You're bold, I'll give you that, but boldness doesn't equal belonging. Leslie leaned forward slightly, her voice low enough that only the nearest guests could hear. You're right, it's not about belonging, it's about balance. Before Florence could respond, Leslie raised her glass toward the table. To balance, she said softly, it reveals what's been tilted all along. The toast hung in the air like a challenge wrapped in civility. Florence clinked glasses, her smile mechanical. You'll fit in once you learn how to behave, she said sweetly. Leslie's reply came without pause, her tone light, almost amused. You'll learn that sooner than you think. The tension rippled across the table, silent but unmistakable. Jason's eyes met Leslie's, and for a fleeting second, he knew the game had begun. Perfect, continuing seamlessly from the last line. Jason's eyes met Leslie's, and for a fleeting second, he knew the game had begun. This second chunk deepens the psychological tension, exposing subtle fractures in Florence's control, Todd's reckless provocations, and James's unraveling neutrality, while showing Leslie move from quiet endurance to deliberate strategy. Florence's laughter returned, first brittle, over-rehearsed, like glass cracking under weight. Such spirit, she said lightly, swirling her champagne. We'll make a Rosser out of you yet. The guests smiled, eager to mirror her mood, but the warmth had gone out of the room. Even the chandelier's light felt colder, sharper. Todd filled the silence with noise. She's already learning fast, knows how to swing a toast like a weapon. He grinned at Leslie, eyes heavy with drink. Careful, sweetheart. You might draw blood if you're not gentle. Leslie's voice stayed calm. Then maybe you should stop standing so close to the blade. A ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension, but Florence's expression stiffened again. The elegance of the evening was fraying, thread by thread. Jason watched from down the table, noting every flicker of Florence's irritation. She's trying to salvage control, he thought. Leslie's dismantling her without lifting a finger. Florence's solution came in the form of spectacle. Let's have some music, she declared, clapping twice. The pianist in the corner began to play a soft waltz, and a few couples rose to dance. James, Florence called sweetly, why don't you show your bride what refinement looks like? James hesitated, then rose. Come on, Leslie, he said, his tone light but hollow. She took his hand without expression. The two of them moved to the center of the room, the guests parting like water. The waltz drifted over polished floors, smooth and distant. James leaned close, his smile brittle. You enjoy making them uncomfortable, don't you? Leslie's gaze stayed fixed on the rhythm. I only mirror what they bring to me. You could try harder, he muttered. To impress them? She asked softly. Or you? His grip tightened, more reflex than affection. They're my family, Leslie. I noticed, she said, and the words landed like a quiet verdict. For a few beats, neither spoke. The music filled the silence, graceful and sad. When the song ended, Leslie stepped back first, releasing his hand before he could release hers. The subtle reversal didn't go unnoticed. Todd clapped loudly from the table. Bravo, the happy couple picture of romance. Florence's smile thinned further. Todd, do be quiet. But Todd wasn't finished. Maybe we should give Leslie another chance to prove she belongs. How about a little game? A question round, like we do every year. Tradition, right, Mother? Florence hesitated. The tradition he spoke of was an old Rosser dinner ritual, a cruel one. The family would ask newcomers light-hearted personal questions that were anything but. It was their way of asserting hierarchy through laughter. Leslie took her seat again. A game sounds fun, she said simply. Florence's eyes narrowed. Are you sure, dear? Some questions can be revealing. I prefer honesty to pretense. Todd grinned. I'll start. Leslie, tell us, when did you first realize marrying my brother would be your golden ticket? A few guests gasped. Florence didn't stop him. James looked down at his glass. Leslie folded her hands on the table, the faintest smile touching her lips. When I realized how fragile your version of gold really is. Todd blinked, confused. What's that supposed to mean? It means some things shine only until the light changes. The pianist's music faltered for half a second. Jason hid a grin behind his whine. Florence cut in, voice coated in steel. That's enough, Todd. You've embarrassed yourself. Oh, relax, Todd muttered, waving her off. She can take it. She's tough. Just like her, what was it, startup job? Florence's head snapped toward him. Todd, but Leslie interrupted gently. It's not a startup anymore. Todd laughed. Right. A real empire, I'm sure. Empires are built quietly, she said, by people who don't need to announce them. The words settled like dust, faint but permanent. Even Florence didn't have an immediate response. The dinner shifted after that laughter subdued, conversation measured. The Rossers had built their reputation on control, and for the first time, that illusion felt breakable. Florence leaned toward James, her voice low. You need to get her in line before the wedding. This attitude won't do. James nodded weakly, but his eyes never left Leslie. He wasn't sure whether to be afraid or impressed. At the far end, Leslie's phone buzzed softly. She glanced down. A message from Adam. Press release draft ready. Need final timing. She typed a single word. Soon. Then she slid the phone away, lifting her gaze to Florence, who was now toasting some anecdote about Rosser resilience. Todd raised his glass in mock salute. To the bride, he slurred, may she survive us all. Leslie lifted her own. Survival's not my goal, she said, voice quiet but steady. Correction is. Todd frowned. Correction of what? She smiled faintly. Perspective. Florence's glass trembled slightly as she set it down. I think that's enough champagne for tonight, she said briskly. We all have a busy day tomorrow. Guests began to rise, the orchestra shifting to a gentle closing tune. Conversation filled the air again, forced, fragile. As people filed toward the terrace, Jason approached Leslie. They're rattled, he murmured. That's not enough, she said softly. Rattled people recover. I want them exposed. He studied her for a moment. You're sure you're ready? Leslie turned toward the window, where the city lights flickered against the night sky. They made me ready. Behind her, Florence watched in silence, smile gone, eyes calculating. For the first time, she saw not a girl desperate to belong, but a woman who could end everything. And somewhere in that gilded room, the Rosser family's laughter finally began to sound like fear. The Rosser estate was quieter than usual. Even the servants' footsteps seemed to hush themselves as the night deepened. The guests were gone. The laughter dissolved into the marble floors, leaving only echoes of gossip and perfume in the air. Upstairs, in the bridal suite Florence had personally approved, Leslie sat at the vanity motionless. The faint hum of the city drifted in through the balcony doors, carrying the muffled pulse of distant traffic. Her repaired gown hung across the room perfect from a distance, but under the lamplight, the faint seam of the tear was still visible. She rose slowly, crossing the room to stand before it. Her fingers brushed the silk, tracing the line Todd had ripped open 2 nights ago. It was almost invisible now, but she saw it like a scar, delicate, permanent, and utterly honest. "Looks better this way," she murmured to herself. Truth shouldn't hide. On the dresser, her phone buzzed once, a secure line flashing green. She picked it up, pressed a single code, and Jason's face appeared on the screen, grainy from a late-night call. Behind him, Adam was half-lit by his computer monitors, and Mr. Carmouche leaned forward, a cigar unlit between his fingers. "Everything's queued," Jason said. "The termination documents, the press release, the redistribution contracts all signed, all encrypted. Once you confirm, the system will deploy at 10 a.m. sharp." Leslie nodded, calm as glass. "Good. We don't move until after the ceremony begins." Adam frowned slightly. "Are you sure you want to do it there? Publicly?" "Yes." Her voice was quiet but absolute. "They used humiliation as theater. I'll return the favor on their stage." Carmouche smiled faintly. "You've got more poise than anyone I've seen in this game. Your father would have admired that." For the first time that night, Leslie's expression softened. "He taught me patience. He said timing is just another language, the one power understands best." Jason hesitated. "You've already won, Leslie. Once this goes live, Rosser Holdings will crumble within hours. You don't need to stand in that room to prove it." She met his gaze through the screen. "I'm not doing it to prove anything. I'm doing it to remind them who they laughed at." Silence followed, heavy, respectful. Finally, Jason exhaled. "Then we'll be ready. Adam's monitoring the financial triggers. Carmouche's team will handle the media spill. The second you tap send, we execute." Leslie gave a single nod. "Thank you for standing with me when I didn't even ask." Adam's voice was quiet. "We didn't follow you because you asked. We followed because you build, not destroy." The call ended. The screen went black, reflecting Leslie's face, steady, unreadable. She turned back to her vanity. Her bouquet lay beside her mirror, a mixture of white orchids and pale peonies, perfect and scentless. She reached for a piece of stationery embossed with her initials, LMB, and began to write. "James, you could have protected me. Just once. That's all it would have taken. Tomorrow, I'll stop waiting for you to be brave." She folded the paper carefully, slid it into an envelope, and placed it inside the top drawer. It would never be sent. Her phone chimed again, this time with a text. The sender, Todd Scully. She hesitated, then opened it. "Hope the dress holds up tomorrow. Maybe bring a spare. Wouldn't want another wardrobe malfunction." "Or do you?" Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She deleted the message, one thumb press at a time, until the screen was empty again. The suite was so still she could hear the faint ticking of the antique clock above the fireplace. Midnight passed unnoticed. She walked onto the balcony, wrapping her silk robe tighter around her shoulders. Below, the estate gardens stretched in manicured perfection, the same gardens where she'd once stood smiling beside James for engagement photos, the same place where she had thought for a moment she could belong. Now, she saw the estate differently. Every window was a mirror, every light a lie. The Rosser legacy wasn't gold, it was glass, beautiful until touched. Her reflection caught in the window pane, the faint scar of the dress visible behind her. For the first time in months, she let herself feel the weight of it all. Her father's death, the mockery, the loneliness, and beneath it, the quiet fury that had sharpened into resolve. She whispered into the cold air, "Tomorrow, they'll see what they broke." Inside, her phone buzzed once more, a calendar reminder. Rosser, LMB merger ceremony. 10:0 amperes. M. She stared at it, then silenced the alert. "No," she said softly. "The cancellation ceremony. The night stretched endlessly calm, patient, waiting for dawn to arrive and bring with it the reckoning she'd been preparing since the silk first tore. The estate slept uneasily. Down the hall, servants moved like ghosts, clearing the remnants of the dinner silver trays, half-drunk wine glasses, a broken pearl earring someone had stepped on and forgotten. In the east wing, Florence C. Bostic sat upright in bed, her phone glowing in the dark. She was scrolling through the society pages, reading comments under the leaked engagement photos. The bride looks underwhelming. Poor James. At least his mother has taste. Florence's lips twitched into something that might have been satisfaction. The public already sees it, she murmured. They know she's beneath us. Still, a faint unease rippled through her, something she couldn't name. Leslie's calm, the precision in her words at dinner, the way Jason Zarate had looked at her, none of it fit the picture of a helpless, social climbing bride. Florence dismissed it as nerves. Tomorrow, she'll marry into this family, she whispered, and I'll have the last word. But miles away in the bridal suite, Leslie had already claimed it. The clock read 2:17 a.m. when she finally sat back at her desk. The documents Jason had sent earlier were open on her laptop, digital pages lined with the language of consequence. She reread them all, checking each clause with the same careful eye her father had taught her to use. Every signature, every timestamp. There could be no mistakes tomorrow. When she reached the last page, she paused. It was her father's old motto printed in the footer, preserved like scripture. Dignity is not silence, it is precision. Her throat tightened. For a long time she simply sat there, fingers tracing the words on the screen. Then, quietly, she opened a folder titled Inheritance Not of Money, but of Letters. Her father had written them in the months before he passed, one for every major decision she'd face. She clicked the one marked Legacy. His voice came back to her in memory, deep and steady. Don't fight for respect, Leslie. Build so much of it that the fight becomes unnecessary. Her eyes burned, but no tears fell. She closed the folder, shut the laptop, and turned off the lamp. The room plunged into soft darkness. From the corner of the suite, the repaired wedding gown caught the moonlight, the faint seam now glimmering like silver thread instead of a scar. She stared at it for a long time. That gown had been her humiliation. Tomorrow, it would become her weapon. She rose and crossed to the wardrobe, pulling out a small black box. Inside lay a pair of pearl earrings, not new, not expensive, just simple. They'd been her mother's. She clipped them on, looking into the mirror. Her reflection was calm, centered, dangerous in its stillness. A soft knock sounded on the door. "Come in," she said without turning. It was the housekeeper, a quiet woman named Hilda who had been kind to her since day one, the only person in the mansion who spoke to her without an agenda. Hilda's eyes flicked toward the dress, then back to Leslie's face. "Big day tomorrow," she said gently. "You should try to rest." "I will," Leslie replied. Hilda hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Bostic told the staff to make sure the ceremony is flawless. She said it'll be the most important day of her life." Leslie smiled faintly. For once, she might be right. Hilda lingered a moment longer, studying her. "You're not nervous?" Leslie met her gaze. "I stopped being nervous when they stopped seeing me." Hilda didn't understand what that meant, but she nodded anyway. "You're stronger than you look, dear." When the door closed, silence reclaimed the room. Leslie walked back to the balcony. The city was beginning to change color, the faintest wash of gray along the horizon, signaling dawn's slow arrival. Somewhere below, the gardeners were already preparing the wedding grounds, trimming hedges, polishing the marble steps. From above, the movement looked mechanical, people readying a stage for a play that would not end the way they imagined. Her phone buzzed one last time. Another message, this one from an unknown number. She almost ignored it until she saw the preview. "James, tomorrow's important. Please don't make things harder than they need to be." Leslie read it twice. The absence of apology struck harder than the words themselves. She didn't reply. She deleted it, then set the phone down beside her glass of water. A breeze swept through the open doors, rustling the edge of her gown. The faint scent of rain hung in the air, fresh and electric. She whispered to no one in particular, "You had every chance to stand beside me, James. Now you'll stand beneath what I built." In the garden below, the first drops of rain began to fall, tracing silver lines across the glass panels of the wedding dome. She didn't move, she simply watched as the storm approached, calm and unshaken. By the time the clock struck 4, the horizon had turned pale blue. Leslie sat once more before her mirror, adjusting the folds of her robe, memorizing the woman staring back at her. Not the humiliated bride, not the outsider, not the quiet observer, but the architect of an ending. Her phone chimed one final time, a scheduled reminder she'd set weeks ago, long before any of this began. "Tomorrow, deliver correction." She smiled softly at the reflection. "Tomorrow," she whispered, her voice steady, absolute. "I return what's owed." The storm outside deepened. Thunder rolled once across the city, low and distant, like a curtain rising. And as the first light crept across the sky, Leslie M. Brown closed her eyes and exhaled, calm, prepared, and utterly unstoppable. The morning broke over the Rosser estate like a performance cue, rain-washed skies glinting pale gold, every surface polished to perfection. By noon, the gardens below had transformed into a cathedral of glass and roses. Beneath the sprawling dome, rows of ivory chairs shimmered like pearls in the sunlight, and the faint hum of news drones hovered in the distance, transmitting the wedding live to half the city. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a display. The Rossers didn't celebrate, they showcased. Florence C. Bostic had spent weeks curating every petal, every menu card, every camera angle. It was less a union than a broadcast of power. Florence stood near the entrance of the glass dome, her sea-green gown glittering beneath the filtered light, pearls cascading down her neck like armor. She smiled broadly for the photographers, gripping James's arm as though to remind the world that he was still hers, even now. "Mother, please," James murmured under his breath. "Smile," she replied through clenched teeth. "If we look flawless, they'll believe we are." The guests arrived in waves, senators, socialites, and business tycoons, dressed like gods of old money. Conversations glittered with envy and speculation. "The Rossers are merging with LMB Innovations. It'll be the largest private tech energy partnership in the country." None of them knew that the woman about to walk down that aisle controlled every digit of it. Leslie M. Brown stood at the far end of the terrace, out of view, the morning light spilling across her face. Her repaired gown draped elegantly over her form, the faint seam of the tear catching the light like a deliberate stroke of silver thread. What had been her humiliation was now her defiance, a visible reminder that beauty didn't need to hide its scars. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass dome's wall. She adjusted the pearl clip in her hair, her movements slow, deliberate. When she looked up, she saw Florence greeting the last of the guests, her smile wide enough to hide her disdain. Jason's voice murmured in her earpiece, a custom-made device disguised as a stud earring. "All systems synced. LED panel's live feed can be hijacked in 3 seconds. Triggers in your phone, just say when." "Not yet," Leslie said softly. "Understood." She slipped the phone into her clutch and exhaled once, steady and slow. A moment later, the coordinator waved for her cue. The orchestra began its prelude, a soft, elegant waltz designed to sound timeless. The guests turned toward the aisle, and the murmurs quieted. Then, beneath a canopy of roses and glass, Leslie began her walk. It was silent at first, then the whispers started. "Is that the same dress? God, she didn't even buy another one. Bold choice. Or disparity." Leslie heard every word. None of them touched her. Each whisper rolled off her like water against steel. Her gaze stayed forward, fixed on the altar where James waited, handsome, polished, uneasy. Florence stood beside him, radiant in control, the perfect matriarch. When Leslie reached the end of the aisle, James took her hand briefly, mechanically. His palm was cold. "You look..." He hesitated, searching for a word that wouldn't sound false. "Real?" Leslie offered quietly. He forced a smile. "Beautiful," he said, though it landed wrong. The priest cleared his throat and began the ceremony, his voice rising and echoing beneath the dome. The vows unfolded like clockwork, the blessings, the readings, the scripted promises that meant nothing in this room full of pretense. And then, just before the exchange of rings, Florence raised a hand. "Forgive me, Father," she said sweetly, interrupting the priest. "Before we proceed, there's something I'd like to ask." The priest blinked, startled. "Of course, Mrs. Bostick." Florence turned toward Leslie, her smile warm enough to burn. "My dear, everyone here knows what my son brings into this marriage legacy. Reputation, responsibility. But what about you, Leslie? What do you bring to the Rosser family?" The guests leaned forward like spectators sensing blood. James tensed. "Mother, don't." "Oh, hush," Florence said lightly. "It's an innocent question." The crowd began to murmur. Someone chuckled softly. A woman in a coral dress whispered, "Grace under pressure, let's see if she has it." Leslie's heartbeat stayed steady. The sunlight caught the seam of her dress again, making it gleam. "What do I bring?" she repeated, her voice carrying easily across the glass hall. "The same thing your son promised me but never delivered." Florence blinked. "And what's that, dear?" "Truth." The word echoed clear, unshakable, crystalline. The guests went silent. Florence's smile faltered, confusion knitting her brow. "Truth?" Leslie's hand moved slowly, deliberately toward her clutch. The gesture was graceful, almost ceremonial. Jason's voice flickered in her earpiece again. "Ready when you are." Her fingers brushed the phone screen. Behind her, the massive LED display, the one prepared to show the Rosser LMB partnership announcement, shimmered to life. The Rosser crest glowed in gold. The words, "A Legacy Renewed," scrolled across the bottom. Leslie looked at it, then at Florence. Her thumb hovered over the screen. "Shall we continue?" the priest asked, nervous now. Leslie smiled faintly. "Yes, let's." She tapped once, and the LED flickered gold fading to black, the sound of the orchestra stuttering mid-note. A ripple of confusion moved through the guests. Florence turned sharply, her smile dropping as the glowing crest dissolved into nothing but a dark screen. Something was coming, they just didn't know what. A murmur rippled through the dome. The music faltered, the string section hesitating mid-note before falling into silence. Guests shifted uneasily, glancing at one another, unsure whether the glitch was part of the show or something far less controlled. Florence's practiced smile flickered. "What's happening with the screen?" she hissed at the coordinator nearest her. I don't know, ma'am. It's not responding." James took a step forward, confusion tightening his features. "Is this supposed to happen?" Leslie stood perfectly still. Her clutch remained open in her hand, the glow from the phone screen lighting her fingers. For a heartbeat, it looked like she was simply checking a message until the LED behind her surged back to life. The Rosser crest vanished. In its place appeared bold white letters against a black field. LMB Innovations terminates $950 million contract with Rosser Holdings effective immediately. Gasps tore through the room. Cameras flashed. Someone dropped a glass, the sharp crack echoing like punctuation. Florence froze mid-breath, her face draining of color. What is this?" she whispered. James's voice broke through the din, tight and furious. "Leslie, what did you do?" She turned toward him, calm, steady, every movement deliberate. "I told the truth." Florence stumbled forward, her heels clicking against the marble. "Turn that off," she barked. "Now!" But the coordinator shook his head helplessly. The system was locked. The headline repeated, this time accompanied by smaller subtext. LMB Innovations cites breach of ethics and public disrespect as cause for dissolution. All Rosser Holdings assets connected to the merger will be reviewed for acquisition by external partners. Phones buzzed around the room. Guests began whispering frantically, scrolling, filming, sending updates to the outside world. A senator's wife gasped, "It's trending already." James's voice rose, shaking with anger. "You can't, this is insane. You're destroying everything, our name, our legacy." "Our?" Leslie interrupted softly. "You mean my contract, my company, my decision." Florence stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Your company?" Leslie met her eyes. "LMB, Leslie M. Brown, my father's legacy. I signed the deal you've been bragging about for months, and now I've ended it." The crowd erupted again. Every whispered insult from weeks before seemed to echo in reverse, swallowed by disbelief. Florence's mouth opened, but no words came. "You can't do this," James said, his voice breaking. "You'll ruin us all." Leslie's expression softened for the first time, not with pity, but with clarity. "You ruined yourselves the night you tore my dignity apart for applause." Todd, pale and sweating, pushed through the crowd. "You think this makes you powerful? You just killed a billion-dollar partnership." "I didn't kill anything," she said evenly. "I redirected it." Florence swayed slightly, clutching a chair. "Redirected? Every asset, every clause, every investor you thought you owned now belongs elsewhere. Jason Zarate, Adam Grill, and Mr. Carmouche are finalizing the transfer to Rothman Energy as we speak." Gasps again, louder this time. Rothman was Rosser Holdings' oldest rival. Todd shook his head violently. "You're bluffing." Leslie tapped her phone once. Behind her, the LED changed again, this time displaying a live news broadcast. The anchor's voice filled the dome. "Breaking news: Rothman Energy announces historic partnership with LMB Innovations following Rosser Holdings' termination. Analysts predict Rosser stock could fall by as much as 50% before market close." The hall erupted into chaos. Guests stood, whispering furiously, reporters scrambling toward the exits to call their editors. Florence staggered, gripping a chair for balance. You planned this?" "Yes," Leslie said. "From the moment you laughed." James lunged forward, his face contorted with desperation. "You'll destroy everything we've built." She met his eyes, unflinching. "You didn't build it. You inherited it. And you wasted it on arrogance." The priest backed away slowly, crossing himself. The orchestra had gone silent. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Florence reached for her son. "James, stop her! Do something!" James's hands trembled. "Leslie, please, you don't have to do this." "I do," she said quietly, "because people like you only learn through loss." She lifted her chin, the torn seam of her dress glimmering under the chandelier. It looked less like damage now, more like design, the mark of someone reborn through fire. "Consider this," she said, her voice echoing clear through the dome. "A correction, not revenge." The words hung in the air like judgment. Todd cursed under his breath and stormed out, knocking over a chair. Florence sank into the nearest seat, her composure unraveling as reporters outside shouted questions through the glass doors. "Is it true the Rosser fortune just collapsed? Who really owns LMB Innovations? Mrs. Rosser, are you still getting married today?" Leslie turned toward the priest. "I believe the ceremony's over." He nodded mutely, stepping aside. She looked one final time at James, the man who had once promised forever and given her humiliation instead. His shoulders sagged under the weight of everything collapsing around him. "You could have protected me," she said softly. "You chose silence. Now silence will answer you." Then she stepped away from the altar. Her train swept across the marble floor, catching the light, trailing through shattered glass and spilled champagne. Each step echoed like a closing door. Jason waited by the entrance, phone in hand, already fielding press inquiries. He held the door open for her as she passed. "It's done," he whispered. "No," Leslie said, her voice calm and final. "It's begun." The glass dome glittered behind her, but its shine was hollow now, a cathedral of collapse. Cameras kept flashing, recording the birth of a story that would rewrite everything the Rossers once ruled. As she stepped into the sunlight, the faint storm clouds began to clear, leaving the air cool and sharp. She didn't look back. Inside, Florence screamed her name. Outside, the world whispered it. The noise hit first, the sound of 100 phones vibrating, the clatter of chairs, the overlapping gasps that rippled through the dome like thunder trapped in glass. The LED screen behind Leslie burned white for a second, then steadied into bold black text again. LMB Innovations terminates $950 million contract with Rosser Holdings breach of ethics and public disrespect. This time, there was no mistaking it for a glitch. The feed had switched to live. News logos appeared in the corner of the screen, global outlets, confirming the broadcast. Florence's pearl necklace snapped as she jerked forward, clutching the table for balance. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Now, do something!" The technicians froze, helpless. Every control panel had gone dark. James stumbled down the steps from the altar, his perfect composure collapsing. "Leslie," his voice echoed through the dome. "End it. You can't do this here." Leslie turned to face him, framed by the giant screen, her expression unreadable. "Why not? You did it here, the mockery, the cruelty, the laughter. I'm simply following your example. Public lessons deserve public settings." A few gasps fluttered from the front rows. Florence's social circle looked torn between pity and fascination. No one dared move. Leslie walked toward the podium where the priest had stood, her torn gown whispering across the marble. She lifted the microphone, her grip steady, voice soft but carrying like steel and silk. "When you humiliate a woman in front of the world," she said, "you assume she has no world of her own. You assume she needs yours to stand. That's your first mistake." James's voice cracked. "Stop this." She ignored him. "You laughed while your brother tore my dress. You smiled when your mother told me I wasn't enough. And all of you," her gaze swept across the guests, those polished faces now ghostly pale, watched. Some even filmed it. "You applauded my humiliation." No one spoke. The orchestra instruments lay abandoned, bows and trumpets glinting under the light like fallen weapons. Leslie lowered her eyes briefly to the torn seam of her gown. "You thought this tear made me less, but it only reminded me what power looks like when it's misused." Behind her, the LED changed again, now showing financial graphs in real time. Rosser Holdings stock prices plummeted before their eyes, red bars tumbling, numbers crashing downward. The crowd gasped audibly. Todd's voice cracked from somewhere in the chaos. You can't be serious." "I'm always serious," Leslie said. "That's what frightened you the most." A live ticker scrolled beneath the graph. Breaking: Rothman Energy announces acquisition of LMB Partnership, Rosser Holdings shares in freefall. Florence let out a strangled cry and dropped into a chair. Her hands shook violently, pearls scattering like fallen teeth across the floor. "You'll pay for this," she hissed. "No," Leslie replied softly. "You already did. In reputation, in legacy, in everything you valued above humanity." She stepped closer to the microphone. The air tightened. "My name," she said clearly, "is Leslie Marie Brown, daughter of Samuel Brown, founder of LMB Innovations, CEO, majority shareholder, the woman behind the deal you just lost." The words struck like a physical blow. Several guests audibly gasped. The journalists in the back scrambled for footage, phones flashing wildly. Florence's lips parted in disbelief. You were the signature?" Leslie nodded once. "And you tore it apart with your arrogance?" James sank to his knees beside his mother's chair, his hands tangled in his hair. "You've destroyed everything," he muttered. "No," Leslie said, her tone calm but edged with precision. "I simply exposed what was already rotten." The LED feed zoomed out to a live newsroom. An anchor's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Rosser Holdings stock is in freefall following confirmation that LMB Innovations has terminated its $950 million merger. Anonymous sources close to LMB confirm that ethical concerns involving senior Rosser executives triggered the decision." Every word landed like thunder. The priest quietly backed away from the altar, murmuring a prayer under his breath. Leslie continued, her tone still controlled, still unshakably poised. "You built your house on entitlement, I built mine on resilience. The difference is simple: when storms come, mine stands." Todd lunged forward, face twisted with fury. "You think you won? You humiliated us." She looked at him, unblinking. "You did that yourselves. I just turned on the lights." Florence's breathing grew ragged, her hands trembling. "You'll regret this," she said weakly. "The world will see you for what you are." "They already do," Leslie said, "and for once they see you too." Her voice stayed soft, but the words cut clean through the noise. Cameras caught everything: the tears, the disbelief, the wreckage of an empire disintegrating in the glare of its own spotlight. Jason's message buzzed briefly in her earpiece. "Stock down 42%, it's over." She exhaled once, set the microphone back on the stand, and turned toward the exit. Behind her, James shouted her name, the sound raw and desperate. Florence collapsed into sobs that cracked through the silence like breaking crystal. Leslie didn't look back. Her torn gown glimmered under the fractured light, not as a wound, but as armor catching the dawn. She walked down the aisle she'd entered as a bride, now a battlefield commander, leaving victory in her wake. And as the LED behind her faded to black once more, only one line remained across the screen. Respect is earned. The audience didn't applaud. They couldn't. They only watched, in silence, as the woman they had dismissed rewrote the definition of power right before their eyes. Outside the glass dome, chaos had already spilled into the gardens. Reporters swarmed like hornets, cameras flashing in a staccato rhythm that matched the rising panic from inside. The once pristine marble walkway was now a battlefield of designer heels, overturned champagne glasses, and whispered disbelief. Leslie stepped into the sunlight, and for a heartbeat, the noise dulled. The storm of voices, the click of cameras, all of it seemed to part around her as though the air itself recognized a new order. Jason waited at the bottom of the steps, his phone pressed to his ear. Adam stood beside him, jaw set, scanning incoming updates. Mr. Carmouche leaned against the black sedan parked nearby, his expression unreadable, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "It's done," Jason said as she approached. Rosser Holdings has been suspended from trading. Market response is catastrophic. Rothman's valuation just doubled. You've made history. Leslie stopped in front of him. "No," she said quietly. "I made balance." Carmouche straightened, flicking ash from his cigar. "The press is calling you the bride who broke an empire." She looked toward the flashing lights gathering near the entrance. "Let them. Every story needs a headline." Behind the glass, she could still see Florence slumped in her chair, surrounded by guests too afraid to comfort her. James stood frozen at the altar, a man staring at the ruins of his own illusion. Todd had already vanished into the chaos, chased by cameras and fury. Leslie turned away from the spectacle and focused on what mattered. "Is the transfer complete?" Adam nodded. "Every clause executed. Rothman Energy officially holds the partnership rights. The public statement hit all networks simultaneously. Rosser's PR team is in meltdown." "Good," she said. "Make sure the employees at Rosser Holdings are informed their jobs will remain secure under Rothman. This isn't about destroying livelihoods, just arrogance." Jason's eyes softened. "You're thinking of them, even now?" "Someone has to," she replied. "Florence and her sons built an empire on inheritance. I'm building one on correction." The words hung in the air, measured. Final. A reporter broke through the security line shouting, Miss Brown, can we get a statement?" Leslie paused at the edge of the car door. The crowd surged closer, microphones thrust forward. "How do you feel after what happened inside? Was this revenge? Are you and Mr. Rosser still getting married?" She looked over the sea of eager faces, the same kind of faces that had laughed at her just days before, but she didn't answer with anger. She simply smiled, serene, composed, the faint glint of steel behind her eyes. "I feel," she said softly, "like truth finally has good lighting." The crowd erupted in more questions, but she stepped into the sedan before they could reach her. Jason closed the door behind her, and the noise was swallowed instantly, replaced by the low hum of the car's engine. For the first time in days, Leslie exhaled slow, measured. Her phone buzzed again, this time with notifications that scrolled faster than she could read. Hashtags, headlines, think pieces. Number: The Bride Who Ended an Empire. Rosser Downfall. Leslie M. Brown, CEO and Avenger? She set the phone face down and looked out the tinted window. The estate grew smaller behind them, its glass dome glittering in the sunlight like a broken crown. Adam glanced back from the front seat. "You know they'll come after you now, legally, publicly, maybe even personally." "They'll try," she said, "but the difference between them and me is simple. I play long games." Jason smirked. "Well, your timing was flawless. Florence will never recover from this." Leslie's gaze stayed on the horizon. "I don't care if she recovers. I care that she remembers." Silence settled in the car, heavy but peaceful. For once, the chaos outside couldn't touch her. Carmouche broke it first, voice low and thoughtful. You know, when your father first brought me into LMB, I wasn't sure you had his ruthlessness. Turns out you have something better: restraint. Leslie smiled faintly. My father believed in restraint. He said revenge burns hot, but correction endures. Jason nodded. You didn't just end them, Leslie. You reset the balance. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. No, she said, I reminded them that respect isn't inherited, it's earned, and once lost, it's expensive to buy back. The sedan turned onto the main road, leaving behind the estate that had mocked her. The sun climbed higher, streaking the skyline with gold and silver. At a red light, her phone buzzed once more, a message from an unknown number. She opened it without hesitation. James, you win. Are you happy now? She stared at the message for a moment, then began to type. Her fingers hesitated only once. Leslie, I didn't win. I corrected. She hit send, then blocked the number. The car rolled forward, merging into the endless stretch of road ahead. Behind her, the Rossers' empire continued to collapse, their name trending not as a mark of prestige, but as a warning. Leslie leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes. The faint hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat were the only sounds. Jason spoke softly from the front seat. What now? Leslie opened her eyes, the city skyline coming into view, tall, gleaming, full of possibility. Now, she said, we build. Without cruelty, without apology. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering rose petals across the empty road, remnants of a wedding that never was. Inside, Leslie M. Brown sat calm and certain, her torn gown still gleaming faintly in the filtered light, a reminder that even broken silk can look like armor when worn by the right woman. By dawn the next day, the Rosser name was everywhere, but not the way it used to be. Every news channel, every social feed, every trading screen glowed with the same headline: Rosser Holdings collapse. LMB Innovations terminates $950 million deal. Financial analysts called it the most elegant corporate execution in decades. The stock freefall was merciless, down 48% by noon, 61% by evening. The family's board scrambled to contain the wreckage, but their empire was unraveling faster than they could lie. Florence C. Bostic woke to the sound of phones ringing and didn't answer a single one. Her social calendar, once gilded with luncheons and charity galas, had gone dark overnight. Sponsors withdrew, partners backed away, and the same women who once praised her taste now whispered words like toxic, finished, and poetic justice. When she checked her email, the invitations were gone, replaced by headlines showing her photo frozen mid-laugh beside Leslie's calm face, the caption, "The matriarch and the woman who ended her dynasty." She closed the laptop with shaking hands. Downstairs, James sat in the den, surrounded by papers, statements, calls from investors, damage control drafts. His tie hung loose, eyes bloodshot. For the first time in his life, no one was calling him brilliant. "Mother," he said hollowly, "they're calling me negligent. There are petitions to remove me from the board." Florence stood in the doorway, her pearls gone, her hair unstyled, her face lined not from age but from disbelief. "We'll rebuild," she said quietly, as if saying it could make it true. "We're the Rossers, we don't disappear." But her voice broke on the last word. On the television across the room, a replay of the wedding turned catastrophe looped again. The moment Leslie spoke, "You humiliated me in front of the world. I just returned the favor, now immortalized as legend." Todd's voice interrupted the footage, a clip that had gone viral overnight. He was laughing drunkenly to a group of guests right before the tear, saying, "Watch this, let's see what cheap silk does under pressure." It was everywhere. Memes, newsreels, commentary. The world didn't just hate Todd, it enjoyed hating him. By noon, one of Rosser's minor subsidiaries announced his suspension pending a misconduct investigation. Florence threw a glass at the wall. "That idiot," she screamed. "He's ruined everything." James didn't even flinch. "No," he said softly. "He just revealed what we already were." Florence turned on him, trembling. "And you stood there and did nothing. She humiliated us, James. She warned us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, and we laughed. The silence that followed was absolute. Across the city, in a private high-rise overlooking Lake Michigan, Leslie sat at her desk surrounded by calm. No chaos, no noise, just efficiency. Jason stood beside her, scrolling through his tablet. Adam joined via video, his background a blur of reporters outside Rothman's corporate tower. "The redirect is finalized," Jason said. "Every clause and asset has been transferred. Rothman's board is calling you the most decisive executive of the decade." Leslie didn't look up. She was reviewing an employee list, not Rosser's, but her own. "And our people?" "Protected," Jason said. "No layoffs, full coverage, benefits intact. You made sure of that." "Good." She closed the folder. "They weren't part of the war. They shouldn't pay for it." Adam chuckled dryly through the feed. Rosser's people weren't so lucky. Their PR firm dropped them within hours. Florence tried to spin it, but the narratives already set a dynasty destroyed by its own cruelty. Carmouche entered quietly, setting a stack of newspapers on her desk. Every front page bore her name. One headline read, "Leslie M. Brown, the CEO who wore her scar like a crown." She stared at it for a moment, then smiled faintly. They finally got something right. Jason crossed his arms, studying her. "You're not celebrating." "There's nothing to celebrate," she said. "What happened was never about revenge." He tilted his head. "Then what was it about?" "Precision," she replied. "They mistook restraint for weakness. Now they know the difference." The air in the office was cool, sterile, perfect, a world away from the glittering cruelty of the Rosser ballroom. Yet, for all her composure, something deep inside her still ached. The ghost of James's voice, the echo of laughter, the shimmer of silk tearing. Jason watched her quietly. "You should rest. It's over." Leslie met his gaze. "No, Jason, it's corrected. There's a difference." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough." On the wall behind her, a muted TV played footage from Rosser's downtown headquarters. Reporters crowded the entrance. A headline scrolled across the screen. "Rosser family seeks emergency bailout amid collapse." Leslie didn't turn to look. She'd already seen enough. Her focus was forward now, toward what could be built, not what had been broken. Still, when Jason left the room, she allowed herself one quiet moment alone. She opened the drawer of her desk and pulled out the folded note she'd written the night before the wedding, the one she never sent. "James, you could have protected me, just once." She read it again, then tore it cleanly in half. The sound was soft, nothing like silk tearing. This one felt like freedom. Outside, rain began to fall gentle, steady, cleansing. The city skyline blurred in silver streaks against the glass. Leslie stood, walked to the window, and whispered to her reflection, "Empires don't fall in a day. They fall the moment they forget respect." Her phone buzzed again, another news alert. She didn't bother to check it. The world would keep talking. She was done listening. For the first time in a long time, Leslie M. Brown felt weightless. By the second day, silence had become the Rosser estate's only language. Even the staff, once omnipresent in their black uniforms, had thinned out, half of them taking temporary leaves, the rest tiptoeing through the halls as if the walls themselves were listening. Florence sat at the breakfast table, staring at a silver tray of untouched croissants. The morning papers were spread before her, the headlines brutal. Rosser matriarch under fire for humiliating CEO bride. Insiders reveal. Family's mockery triggered $950 million collapse. Florence Bostick Rosser from Society Queen to cautionary tale. Her tea had gone cold. The china trembled slightly in her hands, but she forced composure. "They don't understand," she whispered to no one. "We were provoked. She made us look foolish." From the doorway, James appeared disheveled, his tie gone, his eyes hollow. His voice was stripped of all the charm that used to make rooms lean toward him. "Florence," he said quietly, "we were foolish." She turned, her lips trembling. "You will fix this. You'll call her, apologize, and fix this before the company is gone." He gave a faint, broken laugh. "Call her? She doesn't answer my messages, and why should she? We treated her like a pawn." Florence stood, fury sparking through exhaustion. She used us, James. She pretended to be ordinary just to humiliate this family in front of the world. He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. No, Mother, she didn't pretend to be ordinary. We just couldn't see past our arrogance long enough to recognize who she really was. He turned and walked away. Florence's composure finally cracked. The sound of porcelain shattering echoed through the marble room as she hurled her teacup against the floor. Down the hall, Todd sat slumped on the leather sofa in the study, his once perfect hair unkempt, a half-empty whiskey bottle beside him. The television replayed the viral clip of him ripping Leslie's gown over and over, slow motion, the moment the silk tore and gasps erupted. His face filled the screen, drunk, smirking, triumphant. Every time the clip looped, the network logo stamped Corporate Scandal of the Year across it. Todd muttered under his breath, "It was just a joke." But the world didn't care. A joke had consequences when it went viral. A knock came at the door. He didn't answer. The door opened anyway, James. He looked at his brother with something colder than anger. "You know they've suspended your shares, right?" James said. "You're under investigation for harassment." Todd's head snapped up. "You're blaming me?" "She played us all, James. James stepped closer, voice sharp. "She didn't need to play us. You handed her the game." Todd laughed bitterly. "You think you're better? You laughed too." That stopped James. For the first time, guilt shadowed his expression. He didn't answer, didn't deny it. He turned and left without another word, and Todd threw the bottle after him, the crash echoing through the hallway. By afternoon, reporters had camped outside the estate gates. Drones buzzed overhead. News anchors dissected every frame of the wedding footage, comparing Leslie's calm with Florence's fury. Commentators called her the most composed woman ever humiliated on camera. Inside her high-rise office, Leslie watched the coverage in silence. The city shimmered beneath her window, glass towers catching the orange of a fading Sunday. Jason stood nearby, reviewing a flood of congratulatory messages from investors now courting LMB innovations. "Rosser's lawyers sent a statement," Jason said, half smiling. "They claim your contract termination was unethical and emotionally motivated." Leslie didn't look away from the window. "And what did you send them?" "A copy of their own breach clause," Jason replied. Leslie's lips curved faintly. "Perfect." Adam's voice came through the speakerphone next. "Rothman's thrilled. They're offering joint board control. The contract signed, sealed, and announced. You just became the most powerful woman in 2 sectors before breakfast." She turned slightly. "Power isn't the goal, Adam. Stability is. Call it whatever you want," he said lightly. "But the world sees you as the woman who turned humiliation into a masterclass." Leslie gave a soft, almost sad smile. "Let them call it what they like. The truth is simpler." Jason looked up. "Which is?" "That justice doesn't need noise," she said quietly, "just timing." The room settled into a comfortable hush. Outside, rain streaked across the glass again. The city blurred into light and shadow. Her phone buzzed once, an alert from a financial site. Rosser Holdings officially files for bankruptcy protection. Jason exhaled, a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. It's done. Leslie leaned back in her chair, folding her hands loosely in her lap. "No," she said softly, "it's balanced." He nodded, understanding. A moment passed before he asked, "Do you want a press conference? People are asking for a statement." She shook her head. "They've heard enough of my voice. Let the silence speak for me." Jason hesitated, then smiled. "You really are your father's daughter." That drew the faintest flicker of warmth to her expression. "He taught me one thing. Dignity is the only armor that never cracks." The office phone rang once more. Jason answered, listened, then mouthed, "It's James." Leslie's gaze didn't waver from the skyline. "Tell him there's nothing left to say." Jason relayed the message. There was a pause. Then he hung up. "He said he's sorry." "I know," Leslie replied. "That's the problem. He realized it too late." She stood and walked toward the window again, her reflection merging with the city's lights. "Empires fall loudly," she murmured. "But redemption is quiet." Jason approached the doorway, pausing before leaving. "You won, Leslie." Her reflection smiled back at her, faintly calm, luminous, untouchable. "I didn't win," she said. "I corrected." He nodded once and left her there, framed by glass and skyline. Below, the city pulsed with life, unaware that the woman standing in silence above it had just rewritten the rules of power. Leslie pressed a hand to the glass, the faint seam of her repaired gown still visible beneath her blazer, a reminder of everything they tried to tear apart. Now it was unbreakable. The storm had long passed, but its silence lingered, not the hollow kind that follows destruction, but the calm that only arrives when everything false has finally fallen away. 3 months after the wedding that never was, LMB Innovations had become the crown jewel of the tech energy sector. Every business journal, every financial feed, every corner of the corporate world now whispered the same name, Leslie M. Brown. Her company's headquarters, a sleek tower of glass and steel in downtown Chicago, thrummed with quiet purpose. Reporters still tried to get quotes from her. Most failed. The few who did were told the same thing. "We don't build power to prove a point. We build to serve one." Inside her office, morning light spilled across a desk littered with reports, signed deals, and a single photo, a much younger Leslie beside her father, in front of the first prototype for what became LMB Innovations. Both were smiling, covered in grease and hope. Jason Zarate leaned against the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You've been at it since 6 again, haven't you?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe. You know, most people take a vacation after dismantling a billion-dollar empire. Vacations are for peace," she said softly, eyes still on the skyline. "This is purpose." Jason walked closer, placing the coffee beside her. "You've built something cleaner from the ashes, Leslie. That's rare." She turned toward him, her expression thoughtful. "Power isn't rare, Jason. Integrity is. I'd rather keep that." He smiled. Knowing the conversation was done, she never lingered on praise. He left her to the light and the silence that had become her truest companion. Across town, the Rosser estate stood hollow, its lawns overgrown, its grand hallways dim. Florence C. Bostic had sold the mansion quietly to cover debts that kept multiplying. Her name, once a symbol of prestige, now drew only polite silence at luncheons where she used to command laughter. James had disappeared from the public eye entirely. Rumor placed him somewhere in the Caribbean, living off what remained of his trust. Todd, meanwhile, was under federal scrutiny for corporate misconduct, his smug grin replaced by the dull stare of a man who'd realized too late that charm wasn't immunity. The empire that had mocked Leslie's simplicity now existed only in footnotes and gossip threads. Weeks later, Leslie attended a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the LMB Women Forward Initiative, a fund dedicated to mentoring and financing female-led startups across tech, science, and clean energy. Cameras flashed, but her speech was brief. "I was told once that I didn't belong at the table," she said, her voice calm and unhurried. "So I built a new one and left the door open for others." Applause rose, warm and genuine. She smiled not for the cameras, but for her father, for the memory of every dismissal she'd ever endured. That evening, she drove alone to the cemetery on the outskirts of the city. The air was cool, the trees heavy with early autumn leaves. She walked the familiar path to the modest gravestone marked Thomas E. Brown, inventor, father, visionary. For a while she said nothing. She just stood there, the wind moving softly through her hair. Finally, she whispered, "We did it, Dad. I kept your promise, no power without purpose." She placed a single white rose on the grave, her hand lingering over the cool stone. "Respect doesn't need an audience," she murmured. "It just needs memory." Her phone buzzed. Jason again. She smiled and answered. "Talk to me." His voice carried a mix of awe and mischief. "Got a call from Rothman Energy. They want you as chairwoman of the board, full control of the partnership." Leslie laughed quietly, the sound rare and unguarded. "Tell them yes." "You sure?" She gazed toward the horizon, where the city lights flickered like constellations reborn. "Completely. Let's build something that lasts." Later that night, she stood by her office window again, watching the city hum beneath her. The repaired gown, the same one torn on that humiliating night, hung framed behind her desk, the faint seam still visible, a scar preserved, not hidden. Jason joined her once more, handing her a glass of champagne. "To the past?" he offered. She shook her head gently. "To correction." They clinked glasses. A moment of silence passed before Jason asked, "Do you ever think about them, the Rossers?" Leslie's lips curved slightly. "Sometimes, but not with anger, just gratitude. They taught me where not to kneel." She turned back to the window, her reflection merging with the skyline, calm, luminous, unshakable. "They ripped my dress," she said softly, almost to herself. "I rewrote the fabric of their empire." The city glowed back at her like an acknowledgement. Camera pans slowly outward, soft music rising. And hey, if Leslie's journey struck a chord, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If you're ready for more stories of strength, justice, and quiet revenge, check out the 2 videos pinned right here, the ones you'll love next.